Lori. Really appreciate all the work you guys put into this report. We look forward to having further conversations with you. We're also doing our own analysis, so I know I only have a brief amount of time here, but the UAW will be in the comment period, but also publicly putting out a deeper assessment of the rapid response mechanism. Kind of stepping back, labor and civil society has, how we see it, as approached labor violations internationally in four different buckets. You have like the global framework agreement or the standard setting approach, where unions might negotiate with a company. You have the due diligence process that you see really proliferating in Europe. And then you have the state to state. And then we have this new novel standalone mechanism, the rapid response mechanisms. We've been involved in all four of these, from Mercedes-Benz filing due diligence claims in Germany to trying to work through global framework agreements with German companies like Volkswagen and other suppliers. And by far, the rapid response mechanism is in a league of its own. The amount of how quickly it gives relief to workers is really, really exceptional. That being said, there's a lot of work still to be done. So it's the best game in town, but it needs to improve. Our observation, the UAW has been involved in multiple cases, either as a petitioner or in support of, in the case of like Texeed and Caterpillar, but also in supporting independent unions in Mexico, filers in the United States, but also reaching out to the USTR and the DOL and trying to intercede and give our opinion on how these cases should move forward and what we think would be the best remedy in these instances where workers have had their rights violated. I think the one thing to kind of recognize and appreciate, this is a political process that masquerades as a legal or judicial process. And that has made the mechanism sometimes very effective, but I think ultimately has put us in the spot we're in today. So where it's been positive is like in the early days when the USTR self-initiated around GM Salau, when it was unclear how this process would work. And I think Mexican workers were not fully informed of the process, and there was real tension there of whether or not this was going to work. That being said, as you go on, as Mexico was doing, arguably a Herculean effort of reforming its labor laws, there became a reservation that we saw within the U.S. government of, we don't want to push too hard. We want this to be successful. We don't want to push too hard. And there was concern of the USTR, the DOL, becoming Mexico's own Department of Labor, because during the transition from STPS to Federal Center, and even today, there's a lack of enforcement mechanisms, that there was a concern, which doesn't mean the labor violations or anything else has gone away. So to the concerns of workers on the shop floor, that is incredibly secondary, So I think there needs to be some rethinking of how this mechanism works. And we really appreciate, and we've been thinking about this, the independent fact-finding function. Underneath the NAFTA agreement, you had, kind of shaming documents that didn't cause any change in behavior of what was happening on the ground in Mexico. But still, that's an important piece. We are thinking through and want to explore the idea of a private right of action that actually disassociates the political considerations of the U.S. government, the Mexican government, the Canadian government, and really gets down to the brass tacks of what are the companies doing, how are what rights being denied. Also appreciate that it isn't only about companies violating workers' rights. We've seen in many cases where obviously, company unions have done the heavy lifting to violate workers' rights, and your note on judicial interference being part of the consideration. The issue isn't whether or not who did the violation. If the fact of the matter is workers are denied these rights and cannot democratically have input in the working conditions and wages of their facilities, that's where the harm is being done. Stepping back on procedural things, other things we would observe is, at least from the U.S. perspective, the labor attaches. One, there's 5 for the whole country. That is woefully understaffed. 2, they need substantial more authority, and then there has to be baked into that authority protections for workers and how they interact with those labor attaches. In the case of Texseed, we saw several workers get fired after talking to labor attaches, and them being fired for administrative discussions isn't protected by the rapid response mechanism. That is a huge fault in the system, and we need to have a way. Well, ideally, we want to have the Mexican government fully enforce the laws, but given that, you know, the agreement ensures these rights within the agreement, labor attaches should be able to talk to workers inside the shop. They should be able to pull information from the employers. This is all stuff that we do to ensure that our customs and everything else are being fulfilled and their duties are being fulfilled. But when it comes to labor rights, we really clip these labor attaches' authority to do that work. I don't want to take up too much time in recognizing we only have an hour, but the only other thing I'll add is, one, we need to expand the rapid response mechanism to cover more labor violations. And secondly, we are fully supportive of a trilateral rapid response mechanism. You've touched on it, but there's an urgent need inside the United States. If our Mexican colleagues are unaware, in Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, workers today effectively have no rights underneath the National Labor Relations Act because they've deemed the National Labor Relations Board potentially unconstitutional. So anything, if a worker was to file a ULP, a company would just have to say, I don't recognize your jurisdiction, and they have no remediation. And that's probably not going to be pushed through to the Supreme Court till late next year. So we fully welcome our brothers and sisters in Mexico pushing to increase our labor rights in the United States. So there's a lot more to be said, and we really appreciate the conversation. As we get into the review process, we'll be adding more to this. Thank you.